Good evening, members. Please be seated again. Thank you, members. Thank you. These proceedings will be webcast and recorded by the Council. But will anybody else be recording or filming them? I ask so that people at the meeting would know if this will be happening. No? Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies. I've received apologies for absence from Councillors Hinder, Newton, Webb, de Wigadeen Shepherd, Wilby, McLaughlin and Webster. Agenda item 2, dispensation. Are there any applications for dispensation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are none.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests by members? Are there any disclosures by officers? No. Thank you. Agenda item 4. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? We've got to... Sorry.
Item 13, Mr. Mayor.
I think we've all been lobbied on that, haven't we? Item 13. Do I take that everybody's been lobbied? Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of possible disclosures of exempt information. Is it agreed that the item on the agenda be taken in public as proposed? Thank you. Agenda item 6, minutes of meeting of the Borough Council, excuse me, held on the 25th of October 2017. Is it agreed that the item, are the minutes of the meeting of the Borough Council on the 25th agreed as a correct record? Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, item 45 on the minutes at page 1, apologies for absence. I did send my apologies. It was also noted on the webcast, and actually it was in an email to the Chief Executive where I criticised having that meeting held during the school half term.
Thank you, Councillor. Nobody else? Thank you. Mayor's announcements. Okay. Firstly, may I just welcome back Rob Field, wherever you are, Rob. Welcome back. And I hope you enjoy your stay. Thank you very much. I've just been told off by the Chief Executive. It's got to slap my wrist at a minute. That, there's a couple of other things I really need to bring to your attention. That's the Maidstone Live Nativity 2017. It's on Saturday the 16th of December. It's got to be great. There's no doubt about it. I've been to one of their other projects in the past, and it was really, really good. The Mayor is taking part in this as well, so I've got a cameo role, I do believe. But anyway, I'll be there, and we'll be driving this one. Thank you very much. You might have seen as you come in on the right-hand side, there were a heap of local plans that were there. Members, when you leave this evening, could you pick up your copy and save us having to deliver them to you? So if you can remember to do that, we would very much appreciate it. Also, why I remember it, in the Beauvais room after the meeting, there was some wine, some pies, some cheese, etc. You're all welcome. I don't know if there's enough for all of you, but anyway, first come, first serve, it's there. Excuse the cough and the hearing. I've got terrific tinnitus this evening, so if you can just bear with me a bit, please. Over the last 6 months, we've done something like about getting on for 200 engagements, and I'd really like to put on record the thanks to Derek, David, and all other ex-mayors that have actually stood in for me, because at times, you know, we've had so much going that we just couldn't go everywhere. But it's absolutely great that you chaps have done that for us, and there's some wine out there for you later on, just as a little thank you. Amongst the events that we've been raising money on for my 3 charities, charities are Kent Lung Awareness up at Maidstone Hospital, the Sea Cadets, which we're looking to put a pontoon in on the river, and Blackthorn Trust, of which I've worked for years. The charity auction, which was a couple of Saturdays ago now, was a great success. We made something like about £3,000 for my charities, which is absolutely great. I think it was also very pleasing that we had a Mercedes car which was up for auction, used over a weekend. Ironically, the first ticket I pulled out was my son Paul's, so we couldn't kind of live with that one, could we? So we put it back in, and Brian Vizard is the custodian of the Mercedes for a weekend. So I don't know if he's used it yet, but anyway, it's absolutely great that he won that. Thanks to everybody that supported me at my events. It's very much appreciated. The Remembrance Service this year, I've attended, I think, all of them since I've been a councillor, and I just thought this year was absolutely exceptional, with the REs, the Gurkhas and so forth. At the top of the hill there was just no room for anybody, and it was very, very well conducted. It's a big thank you to Julie, my PA, and her team for actually all the fantastic work they've done in putting that on. It's absolutely great. The other charities which I visited, and it always marvels me the number of volunteers that are in charities and actually keep them going. And I was talking to a lady up at the Kent Hospice the other day, and she said, I'm only a volunteer. I volunteer for 3 days a week. I'm only a volunteer. And I said to her, you're the lifeblood of this place. And if it wasn't for you and all the work that you do, charities would not exist. They would not be able to address the ongoing problems which are now before us. So, volunteers, I think we just really need to just pat them on the back and say thank you very much. Amongst the other ones I've been to, there's High Kent, Demelza House, Heart of Kent Hospital, met up with a Syrian family who've lived in this country for a year, and it's incredible the amount of progress that the family's making with their children. I won't go through the rest of them because we want to get out of here this evening, but there's 2 very inspiring visits that we made. A Licence to Kill, I don't know if anybody's seen that, which is aimed at young people who are or are about to become young drivers. It was really hard-hitting, and hopefully it can save lives. It was so hard-hitting that there were some of the students there just fainted. it was literally, you know, this is what can happen to you and how life-changing it can be. And I know I've spoken to my grandson who's seen this, and what he said to me was, I don't overtake anymore. Because if you look at that, the prologue relating to that, it was about somebody that just overtook, head-on, dump, and that somebody killed. But it's just not that person, it's the family and the outer family that actually become affected by it. It was very, very much hard-hitting, and I just hope that those that saw it and attended take note of it. And the last one I wanted to just mention to you, the medical detection dogs, whose work was truly amazing, and the life-changing, in particular, those with diabetes and also prostate cancer. We kind of look at dogs, and that little nose of theirs is so sensitive. And there was a lady there who's got one of these medical detection dogs that when her medication, and she could be asleep at night, when her medication is such that she needs an extra dose, the dog will detect it via her breath, give her a dab, wake her up, and so forth. This particular dog was so great that if things actually went wrong, they pushed the panic button and they went from there. And when I was talking to her, she said that on average, before she got the dog, she was calling the ambulance 4 or 5 times a week. And when you consider that is something, it equates to something like about £400 to £500 every time. Every time an ambulance is called, it's so it's a great saver relating to that. All right, okay. So we've done something like about 200 engagements so far. There's loads and loads of places that you go as mayor, and I say anybody that gets the opportunity to become mayor, it is absolutely fantastic what you do. Just one other item I'd like to bring to your attention. That was the Battle of Britain operation room at Northolt. When you go down there, you don't realise just how close we come to losing the Second World War. It was literally that tight. And it was all controlled by this little one dugout and half a dozen girls and so forth manoeuvring the aircraft around. So they're just some of those that we've attended, and so we'll now move on. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to change the order of business for this evening. I intend to change the order of business to take the motion relating to the bridge gyratory system after item 18. The Council will be acting as corporate trustees for the charity known as the COBTREE Manor Estate when dealing with items 21 and 22, and as corporate trustees of the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Museum Trust when dealing with items 23 and 24. Item 8, petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Question and answers from the public. There are no questions from the public this evening. Item 10, question from a council member. I've received notification that Councillor Clark wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transport Committee. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. In light of the Secretary of State Sahid Javid's announcement of plans to increase housing by 40%, can the Chairman of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee outline how Maidstone would benefit from having a newly adopted local plan and explain how we can approach the government's new housing targets?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Clark, for your question. I think it's really simple. Because we have a local plan, for this period of time, our housing target is fixed. And that will remain the case until either the 5 years review period comes or we actually review the plan. So I think that we at Maidstone are in a very, very strong position whilst the government consults upon these proposals, and who knows what will happen within that period. There may be a further change, but here and now, the local plan gives us excellent protection.
Thank you, Chairman. Given how much energy the members have put into developing protected landscapes as part of the local plan, will the Chairman assure us that the landscape going forward will continue to be protected by this council?
Mr. Mayor, with respect, I don't believe that that question arises out of the answer, does it?
Agenda item 11, current issues, report of the Leader of the Council, response of group leaders and questions from council members. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, I've got 5 items to cover and there's no clock ticking up there, so I'll have to canter through and hope that I keep to time. The period in which a challenge could be made to our local plan came to an end today. The adoption of a local plan can only be overturned by a successful challenge to the High Court on a point of law, and I can now tell you that we have now received 2 S113 challenges to the local plan lodged with the court under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. The first is from the CPRE, the second from a resident of Headcorn. We have the papers for both of these. We're currently assessing them, and we have to file a response to each with the court within 21 days of service. So the skates are on. We're going to have to act on that very quickly. There's been much written on social media and in the press regarding a difference of opinion between the Borough and KCC regarding the proposed Leeds-Langley Relief Road. Indeed, sadly, there's been a concerted effort in some quarters to personalise it as a difference of opinion between Paul Carter and myself. Actually, my interest is not with Paul Carter, it's with the local plan and the Leeds-Langley. So, together with our Chief Exec, I'm doing everything I can to come to an amicable resolution. However, I must remind everyone that the Conservative, with a small c, estimate of building this road is in excess of 50 million in taxpayers' money. So we have to ensure that if we are to put it in the local plan after review, that we have to have the evidence which substantiates the need for the road. And as yet, no matter what has been said, we have not had that. So this is very serious. We have offered to jointly commission and contribute towards the cost of obtaining this evidence. I was going to say that it's not yet been accepted, but late this afternoon I heard that KCC has said they are open to this, so that is now very good news. And the other issue that we also need to bottom out is the understanding between both KCC and ourselves about the use to which Section 106s can be put and how they've been framed, and hopefully we can resolve that as well. In the main, the Borough and County Council, together with other districts in Kent, work closely together, and I can report that all 14 leaders signed a letter in support of the bid submitted jointly by the University of Kent and Canterbury Christ Church University for the allocation of medical school places from the additional national allocation from 2020-21. As a Borough Council, we also wrote independently in support of the bid. And as you know, the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership, which includes all 14 authorities, together with education and business communities, wrote in no uncertain terms about our dismay at the recent announcement that there would be a delay in introducing the Thameslink Maidstone East Link line. I think it's really good to know how closely the districts, county council and the business community and the education authorities work together on so many issues through the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership. It really does quite a lot of good in that direction. And the other good news is that last week I attended, together with MP Helen Grant and Councillor Steve McLaughlin, the launch of the Medway Flood Action Plan. The Medway Flood Partnership, of which we are a part, brings together a wide range of organisations, and over the next 5 years at least 19 million will be spent to reduce the risk of flooding to over 1,700 homes along the River Medway. I'm pleased that there is now recognition that no one measure will be effective by itself, and in addition to improving existing flood protection and providing new defences, we are looking at ways to slow the flood waters and reduce flood levels through natural flood management. While this is good news, I'm going to say that it's taken a painfully long time to get to this point, really painfully long time. So I'm quite optimistic now that things are moving forward. The work's already started on some of the individual flood mitigation measures to individual properties. I'm delighted, actually, that it's now been accepted that there's not a one-size-fits-all, because that's patently not true. And I'm pleased that it's realised that there has to be a combination of factors, but there's still a very long way to go. So it's a question of keeping the foot on the accelerator all the way through. So thank you, members. And before I sit down, happy Christmas to all of you.
Thank you, Leader. Some good news there. Thank you very much. I now call upon other group leaders to respond. Each have 5 minutes. Councillor Perry.
Oh, it's not working. Oh, God, it went red. That's a bad sign, isn't it? But, first of all, I'm very pleased to hear about the flood mitigation measures and the work on that. But I would say, and as someone who lives in a floodplain, that these are quite complex, and some of the measures are quite controversial, and I think there's still an awful lot of work to be done in that area. If I could come back to an area, something that's for me very important, it's the work on the Leeds-Langley Relief Road. Now, I've got in front of me actually a whole wad of correspondence here that's been going backwards and forwards between Maidstone Borough Council and Kent County Council. Now, at the end of the day, some of this stuff, we now find ourselves in what I can only describe as a bit of a playground dispute, with one side saying they're right, the other side saying they're right, and we end up in the middle of a kind of dispute. And I think that what we really have to say here is that we must try and stop this and actually look forward and not backwards. I know there's a lot of previous in all this, an awful lot, but that's not the way to do things. I mean, I've got a lifetime of experience working in the international diplomatic world, and the one thing I do know from bitter experience is when you go into a negotiation, you don't take all the previous with you, you try and look ahead. And I think this is what we've got to do here. And what I would ask is that we sit down with KCC and we work together. And I'm pleased to hear that some of the points you have raised, because I think that they make a very good start. But I think we've actually got to get together and sit around the table and really just start and clear the decks a little bit to get this sorted out. So I really do believe that, and we've got to stop the ping-pong battle. Now, one option might be for us, because I know there's always money here, that we should consider maybe to make our own contribution to this, to help this get this kick-started off. I'm only suggesting it as a possible option, but I do think it's something we should consider, because we must have some sort of vision on this and not just keep going back over old ground. I won't, as it's a Christmas meeting, I am going to quote from the Bible, actually, and it's from Proverbs, and it's chapter 29, verse 18. Where there's no vision, the people perish. And I think we need vision on this, all round. And that's what we need to do. We'll cut out all the previous arguments and let's move forward and try and resolve this, because we're not getting anywhere by just exchanging letters all the time. And I'll leave there and wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Gooch, Leader of the Independent Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm particularly pleased that at last the flood relief efforts are beginning to pay off, because even in my own small patch of Barming, I had residents who just had to move out permanently, and it took a couple of years for them to move back in. But I do hope that the plans, the work that's being done, will affect as many Maidstone residents as possible and bring as much relief to our people as possible. So well done to officers and councillors that have been involved in that. That really is helpful and good news. I think enough has been said about the proposed relief road. I think that's been done to death, because there's been so much talk. And what I look forward to is a bit of the old do. I would just be a bit cautionary. There's one thing to make a contribution, but boy, we need evidence. When I think of the hard work that we put into evidence on the local plan, and look at the agony we had on that. So we certainly need to get our ducks in a row and evidence lined up with any part of the relief road. Finally, I just want to say that I'm so pleased that the way our borough works, in partnership with other organisations, Kent County Council, other borough councils, district councils, the business community. I do think we ought to pat ourselves on the back, whether it's fighting for the Thames-Kent link, I've said that wrong, Kent-Thames link line, or supporting a bid at Canterbury. I think we really do very well. We've got an excellent borough here, and touching on, it's part of the vision that we have. We want Maidstone to move forward and really count for something, and I think we're proving that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go along with the previous speakers and talk about the relief road. Part of this problem with all this traffic runs right through my ward, and there's a lot of talk been going on about we can do this, we can do that. What we need to think of and remember is that we're here to serve the residents of the borough, and we should do our utmost to try and get something done about the problems in Willington Street. We've got a project coming up, which is the A274 Willington Street, Wallace Avenue proposal, which is not going to make the slightest difference whatsoever to the traffic and the problems around that area. So the sooner that we get together with KCC, if necessary, or try and do something on our own, the better. Because, as I say, at the end of the day, it's not for us, it's for the residents.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on a few of the points made. All I'd say on the Leeds Langley Ring Road is actually to support what Councillor Perry said. We need to now put history aside and just get on with the discussions with KCC. We need KCC to come with an open mind, sit down with us, look at what needs to be done and get it done. At the moment, it's just going in circles, and each side is, the press and all the rest of it. We just need to get it moving on. We need to negotiate with them properly. The local plan, it's excellent. We've got a local plan in place. As was said earlier to a question, it protects Maidstone in terms of any extra housing requirements, at least for the initial period, so that's good. We need to make sure that we can defend it against these High Court injunctions on it. I think talking about partnership, looking at the work we do with the business community and our economic development, we punch well above our weight as a council, working with the business community in Maidstone to actually help regenerate the borough. It's really unfortunate we've been let down by Thameslink, which has been delayed a year, because it wasn't that long ago I was at a meeting where we were talking about rebuilding Maidstone East Station and the need to get the work accelerated on that to have it ready for the 2018 opening. Now it's 2019, 2020. You know, when will it actually happen? We've heard of, you know, there's no need for the slippage. They've got the trains in place. So really, I think that's probably all I need to say tonight on this. I'd just like to, just as the final person speaking, again, to wish everybody a really happy Christmas, a Merry Christmas, and a prosperous New Year. And let's all look forward to 2018 to work in continuing partnership across the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. I'll now open up this item to questions from council members for a period of 15 minutes. Questions must relate to the issues raised by the leader and other group leaders in their speeches. They will be answered as directed by the questioner and will not require a response from all group leaders. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, a question for the leader. I'm not going to quote from the Bible. Do you have any update for members on the situation regarding 106 contributions to the Sutton Road highway mitigation?
Thank you. That does clearly relate to what I was saying. So I'm going to try and answer some of the other things too. We are not going round and round in circles. What we're trying to do is get clarification on the issues where either we don't see eye to eye or we misunderstand each other. And one of these issues is the question of section 106, where Kent County Council says they've got a unilateral agreement, and they do. And we have section 106 arising from the planning consents. And where there appears to be some mud, if I can put it that way, is the understanding between each party about which planning application which relates to. So the borough has actually requested Kent County Council to give us a schedule of their understanding of it so that we can put it alongside ours. The reason I wrote a letter was to try and clarify what the issues were. You've got to there's no point going to a meeting and then sitting there as you're right and just rehashing everything that's old. You've got to go to a meeting with people understanding what it is you're trying to negotiate or come to an understanding on. And that was the purpose of my first letter and the subsequent letter from the Chief Exec. And that is one of the issues. I feel a bit like Brexit negotiations at the moment, but I think we've got a way out so that we can try and clarify that. So yes, it is a sticking point, but it's one that I think is absolutely eminently resolvable if we put the two things side by side and then see where there may be a divergence that we just need to iron out. I think it can be resolved so that we have clarity. And the section 106s that are clearly have been agreed for something other than the road, if I can put it that way, have to be maintained for what they were originally designed for.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Mortimer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask the leader to possibly expand upon the basis and the challenge of the local plan, please?
I can tell you in broad brushstrokes what it was. The one from the CPRE is primarily to do with Woodcut Farm, and the one from the resident of Headcorn is primarily to do with housing allocations. So I can't give you more detail than that. Clearly, I haven't read it, and I'm not a lawyer. It's with the powers that be. The main thing is trying to get to a speedy resolution and actually getting our response through as quickly as is reasonable, and it may perhaps not go beyond that, because obviously the court look at it and say they either do or do not agree that there is a case to be made on behalf of the two people or the two organisations that have called it in. So I can't go beyond telling you what the process is up to that point. That's really, I can't really say much more than that.
Councillor Dan Daly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is addressed to the leader again. In the discussions between KCC and MBC about the local plan, and particularly about roads and the various things that go around those, I'm aware that quite a lot of discussion is now taking place about population growth. And with population growth comes the pressure on hospitals, on local practices, and all the other things that we have to consider when we're talking about the population at large, from young people right the way through to the old. And the connection now between planning, health, and social services, and those sorts of things. Now, I understand that there are bids being put forward because training is one of the most important parts of all this. And it's noted that there are shortages of doctors, there are shortages of nurses, there are shortages of other skilled people across the place. Are you aware of anything for West Kent that is likely to be associated possibly with KIMS rather than the ordinary NHS? Because I understand that in East Kent, the only bids coming forward at the moment for training are going to be coming from universities. So I would like to know if there's anything coming for West Kent associated with KIMS or with Junction 7. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I've got some notes here about exactly what this bid is all about. First of all, perhaps you should know that Kent as a whole suffers one of the worst statistics for vacancies in primary care in the country, and less than 80% of positions are currently filled. And Kent is also one of the only counties that doesn't have its own, if I call it a medical school. Clearly the bid is based on the universities, but what we're actually looking for is what they call I think a hub and spoke system. So while the education is with the universities, the practical side of it actually gives us every opportunity at the KIMS site, because there will be 3 hospitals in effect there of different types, and that's why we were so keen to put in our own Maidstone Borough Council support of what the two universities are bidding for, but also I signed along with all the other Kent leaders, because we have a real problem in Kent, and to actually get these extra allocations would really help us here to train, and for us to actually involve KIMS quite intimately with the universities in delivering the practical side of the education that the nurses have, and doctors. Thank you, Chief Exec. So please, I think it's a question of keep your fingers and toes crossed that this is successful for Kent. Thank you, Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Leader. David Burton, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid I need to return to this Leeds Langley issue. And I've got to start by saying my personal view is that the correspondence that has come from this authority, whether it be in the leader's name or other, has in actual fact been unhelpful. It's been likened to the Brexit negotiation, I think. The difference is, though, and having taken the trouble to watch the webcast of the Cabinet Committee meeting at County and listen to it word for word, and there were huge tracts that I could have believed were actually written by our own officers, that county officers were reading out. I came to the conclusion we're on the same page. So what I'm asking you, Leader, will you commit to actually putting an offer of tangible financial support into the evidence collecting work that needs to take place now.
I will tell you that this has been offered more than once, but it has to be a joint thing. It's not just putting in money. Joint commissioning and joint financial input. And we have to have both. It's no good us putting money in if we do not actually have the joint commissioning at the same time. And we have offered that more than once. As I said, I was going to come here saying the offer has never been accepted, but I did hear quite late today that the wording was, we are now open to this, but I have not heard that they're open to the joint commissioning yet. And frankly, I think this council would be rather foolish to put in money without having the joint commissioning. And so will I commit this council? Well, I don't have the power as leader of this council to commit any money, because that is a decision for the council to make in the appropriate committees. Do I believe that we should do it? Yes, I do, but not just handing over money without joint commissioning.
Brian Mortimer, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry I'm going back to the local plan again, Leader. Obviously, the challenge has come in within the 6 weeks, which is up today. So does that mean that we have a adopted local plan, or does it mean we do not have an adopted local plan because of the challenge? Thank you.
Actually, I don't have a definite answer about that. It's a question I asked this afternoon, but we do use the local plan that we've got. I mean, we do, but what the precise implications are, I think we need to look at these papers and see what happens. But we are not left without clothes, if I put it that way. We can still use the local plan that we all voted on. Clearly, I have a bit of a concern about how long this may drag on for. That then may have an effect on the local plan, if I put it that way.
Thank you, Leader. Chris Garland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your political discussions with Kent County Council leadership regarding the Leeds-Langley bypass, Relief Road, is it evident, or do you sense that there actually exists this time around a genuine political will to deliver on it? Because it's all very well putting money in and commissioning planning projects which can sit on shelves, which I have done for the past 30 years, but do you sense this time, because I never have, a genuine political will to actually deliver this time around?
I think what individuals may want personally has little relevance now with what a council may deliver collectively. I will give you that answer. And Councillor Garland, I'm sure you're wise enough to know precisely what I am saying.
Thank you, Councillor. Matt Borden, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very pleased to see that the leader had made her views very clear to Thameslink and GTR specifically over the delay that was caused following the recommendations of the industry readiness boards that GTR looked at. But would the leader be able to share with this council her analysis of the decision by GTR and what specific points she has made to them to say why this service should be commissioned sooner than other services that Thameslink are going to be commissioning?
I think the annoyance that isn't just mine, but is shared particularly by Peter Fleming in Sevenoaks, is that they've had money for a considerable length of time and have been telling us all this time that it's going to happen. And then suddenly we're told that actually to get it through the junction, it will have to be done in phases because they're not sure that they've actually got enough capacity at the main junction to get it through. So they're going to do it bit by bit by bit. Frankly, my analysis is that that is a very empty excuse, How do I know whether that's 100% true, what they're saying, or not? What I will say is that I believe it shows a totally incompetent company if they've actually said that they can do it and have been telling us up to, 3 weeks ago, that it's all on track, literally on track, sorry, all on track, and then suddenly it isn't. And my analysis is that the South East, but particularly Kent, is continually overlooked by central government, and that rubs off on the other companies that we with which we have to deal. So I'm not an expert analyst, but I can tell you that I'm disgusted with the whole thing, and I think the excuses given were very, very thin. And I hope that, and what I'm going to say to all of you is, if you have business contacts, get them to write as well, because we really need this message to go home really clearly, that we are sick to death of being put at the end of the queue over and over again. And that's exactly what's happening in Kent yet again. So my analysis, all I can say is it's wearing thin. I can't go with it. They've had 4 years now in which to get this right. And suddenly at it's not the 11th hour, it's the 99th and a half, hour to midnight, they've suddenly said they can't do it and we're put at the bottom of the queue. Totally unacceptable.
Thank you, councillors. We've run over our 15 minutes, so apologies to Rob Field and Louise Bryce there. Thank you. I now move to agenda item 17. I call upon Councillor Mrs Wilson to move the recommendations of the Policy and Resources Committee regarding the Council Tax Reduction Scheme 2018-2019 recommendations on page 17.
Mr Mayor, I know what you mean. It's item 12 on page
17. 12, sorry, yes. Okay.
Right, I just may need to turn to it. Just bear with me a minute when I get to page 17. Right. I move the recommendation that the amended council tax reduction scheme attached as Appendix 2 to this report is agreed, and that the live date for the amended council tax reduction scheme of November 2018 is noted. Oh, that's okay. Agreed.
Agenda item 13, Democracy Committee, 15th of November 2017, as on page 187. I called upon Councillor Friddenden to move the recommendations of the Democracy Committee arising from the Planning Referrals Process Review, recommendations on page 187.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the recommendation as set on page 187 to 188.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you. Clive English.
Mr Mayor, I would like to move and propose an amendment to delete the recommendations as set out on page 187 to 88 and replace them with the set of recommendations in full set out on the following 2 pages. 189 to 90.
Councillor Harper?
Yes, I'd like to second the amendment and reserve my right of reply.
Thank you. Councillor English?
Mr Mayor, the Democracy Committee went to a great deal of trouble, as did officers, to hold a full review with the committee meeting as a working group. It was a well thought through, well presented review, yet when the committee discussed it, a completely different decision was reached. My opinion, my view, is that the original recommendation of the review was the correct one for a number of reasons. It is quite clear to me that there has been a lot of emotion around this subject, and there continues to be a lot of emotion around planning determinations and the process for dealing with particularly contentious applications. We do need a process, and I speak as a member who was heavily involved in the planning application that led to the establishment of the first discussion on planning reviews, which was, of course, the Hale Mill application and events following from it. So we do need, I am convinced we do need a process. The question is what form of process. It is, in my view, not an ideal scenario to have this meeting, which is the most theatrical of the Council's many meetings, the most prone to, shall we say, an imitation of an event that might be taking place shortly at the Hazlitt Theatre, to be sitting in a quasi-judicial function. I personally would have preferred a slightly different outcome to the recommendation, the original review, which would have been nearer to the original review system we had before the Cabinet system was introduced. But I am convinced in my own mind that a referral mechanism to policy and resources is infinitely more manageable in that it involves fewer people and is infinitely more likely to result in a measured decision than a referral to full council, which is almost inevitably going to result in a, shall we say, a sporting event atmosphere, which is not the best form of consideration for such important and weighty matters. And you will have seen from some of the lobbying material that we've been sent by an organisation of which I used to be chairman and secretary and used to be very proud of being associated with, just how high emotions can run and just what sort of twaddle can be written about these issues, because frankly any idea that we should just as a council allocate vast sums of money to essentially have a process by which we're actually going to deliberately lose large sums of money is unwise. So I'm now finishing and urging members to vote for the original recommendations of the working group.
Thank you. Councillor Borden.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and it's very interesting that this amendment has been brought before us tonight in light of the decision from the Democracy Committee, because, of course, the Democracy Committee originally decided to establish a working group on this specific subject, which met twice. It then had the meeting in question, the last meeting of the Democracy Committee in November, and it reached a recommendation. And what we have tonight, as with a lot of recommendations, such as the one we've just voted on, is for Council to, in effect, rubber stamp the decision that its committee has made. And the reason we have these committees on the Council is in order to have a representative sample of the Council as a whole to make these decisions for us. Otherwise, we, as a group of 55 councillors, would be meeting every week, sometimes multiple times a week, and all the items we've got later on the agenda about committee places and the allocation of seats and this very complicated formula and who sits on what is worthless, isn't totally meaningless. So, as far as I can see, it's interesting that this amendment has come forward, no doubt, but of course, actually, the Democracy Committee has at length, and I don't think anyone can deny that whatsoever, looked into this issue. It's a very important issue, of course, but that is precisely the purpose of the Democracy Committee to do such a thing. And for us 55 to sort of make a decision on the fly, I don't think is good enough. The Democracy Committee worked very hard at its last meeting when it had established that what was agreed by the working group was not acceptable to many members to come up with a form of words. In fact, they even went to the trouble to have a named vote on the issue in the minutes, from what I remember, as well. So, as far as I can see, there is no grounds at this meeting tonight to overturn the decision made by the Democracy Committee at the last meeting, and so I will not be supporting the amendments put forward by Councillor English. And for the sake of this council, for the sake of its committees, for the sake of its committee system, what we should do tonight is go ahead with the decision made by the Democracy Committee itself. Otherwise, you are actually suggesting that we should have a totally different system of governance whatsoever, and I look forward to the following items being deleted if this amendment is passed.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. OK, I think I will start with the fact that we have to have planning referrals. We have to have a planning referrals committee. And I know there are people in this room who don't think we should have it. They think that whatever decision is made at planning is sacrosanct. Well, I'm sorry, I disagree with that. You have to have a backstop. You have to have something. I don't actually agree with it going to P&R. I don't really agree with it going to full council, because I think the training that will be required, whether for P&R or for full council, will be particularly onerous. What happens if someone comes in late and they haven't attended the training? If you look at the last time planning referrals met, there are a lot of people who said, I don't agree with those 3 people sitting on the committee. I don't agree that they've been trained enough. I don't agree that their knowledge is enough. So by saying it's got to go to 55 people, how are we all going to be trained? By saying it's got to go to 15. How are they going to be trained? Do you train the subs as well? My goodness me, the list is endless. This is growing like Topsy. If I had my way, which I can't, I think planning referrals should have 7 individuals on, because I think that would be a slightly better balanced number. I disagree with Councillor English that it's a spectator sport. I'm sorry, this is a pugilistic environment. We punch each other up verbally, but once we walk out of the door, it's all relatively friendly. And sadly, whether you agree with the committee system or not, which, as we know, some years ago I voted against it, we either back what we've got or we sack it. So if we've got the committee system, we have invested time in a working group, in that committee, doing its job, let's back it. Otherwise, I think we make ourselves look incredibly foolish.
Thank you. Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do disagree with my colleague, Councillor Bolton, in that decisions made by committees shouldn't be debated at full council. That is what full council is there for. And just because historically that we've always rubber-stamped it, to use this phraseology, doesn't mean we need to continue to do so of all decisions that come to us. So I think it's right, if members wish to put amendments forward, that they should do so. That's what full council is for. In terms of Planning Referrals Committee, it is my view that the status quo worked well. I had no issue with how that was set up. It's been done for the past 10 or 15 years, and it is absolutely right that there is a backstop to Planning Committee, particularly when costs are there and officers who do this day in and day out, sometimes I think we forget that, give us their professional advice that actually this is not a good idea to go to appeal, and therefore to go for a backstop. Most other authorities have exactly the same thing. So to try and abolish that would be completely erroneous thing to do. In terms of going to full council, I have huge reservations about that. I know many members think that's the right thing to do. My view, having served on this council for some 14 years, is that is completely the wrong thing to do. It is a pugilistic environment, to use a phrase. It is an environment that is necessarily politicised, and that's a good thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think this is the right forum for planning applications that have been referred to come to. It would be very difficult for developers, it would be very difficult for residents to actually put their argument amongst 55 people, assuming we're all trained. It is my view that it would be a logistical nightmare. Now, absolutely, it's not used that often, very sparingly, but when it is used, it is important that this council gives out the right message. And I think putting these kind of controversial applications, like Waterside Park or Junction 8, to full council is absolutely not the right thing to do. Others may disagree with me, that's up to them. But it's my view that my view is absolutely we should maintain the status quo. That isn't an offer, and I'm not going to put an amendment to do so. So if PNR or some other committee is the only version to do that, then that is something I think that we should consider quite seriously. But to send it to full council with the consequences to the public and to our reputation on controversial planning applications is absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also agree with this amendment, and I do feel that we open ourselves to challenge. If we have a quasi-judicial environment in this setting, my concern is that we would be significantly more exposed to challenge, whether people haven't attended the training, etc. From my perspective, sitting on the planning committee, I'm also concerned about the almost conflict of interest. The planning committee makes a decision. We've basically said what we individually feel at the point at which we make that vote, and I think it's very good that we have a very independent body that then reviews that to determine whether or not the council is open for costs or at risk of costs. So I feel there should be an exclusion between those two groups, and I do worry about the possibility of us facing a challenge if we turn up in this forum after already saying our views at planning and voting on those views, and then we're coming here predetermined on a review for the planning referrals, and I will be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Matt Burton, please.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just quickly address the issue of training. To my mind, that doesn't seem half as complex as we seem intent on making it. If somebody isn't adequately trained to sit on a decision of planning referral at full council, then they would duly recuse themselves as if they would seem to be predetermined in any other issue. You know, you step aside from issues that you're not qualified or you're incapacitated to be a part of. I'm going to speak quite candidly about why I think some members feel uneasy about this potentially going to policy and resources, and I think it's to do with the fact that we don't operate the cabinet system here, but there does seem to be a diversion of responsibility towards policy and resources, in some cases for due and right reasons, but there is a sense that it could become a cabinet by any other name. Now, I don't necessarily therefore think that means that council is the right place to take these decisions. I was less convinced by the argument that Councillor English made to do with grandstanding, because I think when people grandstand at full council, more fool them, because actually the I can't remember the word, pugilistic, yeah, that one. One for the vocab now. That environment is precisely what turns people off from engaging with us as a council and as elected representatives. So if people want to come here and grandstand, more fool them. I do think that there ought to be a third way, because the big issue with planning referrals was that it seemed deeply undemocratic that there were only 3 individuals, and maybe it should be a body more the size of policy and resources, but not policy and resources itself.
Thank you. Dan Daly. Thank you.
Well, Chairman, hello, and I think this is a wonderful thing we've got here tonight, a true debate. People actually standing up and saying something without a prepared speech. What a wonderful thing that is. We're going to have actually discussion about a subject, I think, which will probably affect most of us one time or another. I know I've tried for the 27 years I've been in this chamber to keep away from planning. It's kept me sane, or saner than I probably would have been otherwise. I've only ever been to planning committees as a supplicant on behalf of somebody else. But I know that from time to time I've listened very carefully to what's come out of that, and I thought to myself, well, I'm not quite sure I agreed with that. So I do think there needs to be a referral system. And I think to do away with it would not be right. But where would you put it? Now, if you haven't got trained people to deal with it as a referral, and I don't think it happens very often, but when it does need to be done, it has to be done by trained people. Now, Councillor Borton has quite rightly said it ought to have a number of people representing the whole council, properly trained to do it. Now, of the list of people that we've got dealing with various committees, Policy and Resources actually is the only one on the papers that's got a completely mini council, actually, in terms of the way in which we are mathematically worked out. Now, I think that doing it that way is the best way to do it, because if it then needs another backstop, you can always come back to council after that. But to involve council in any of these things, I think is wrong, because none of us, all of us, have been properly trained in dealing with planning. But to be properly trained, I think you need it. The people who sit on policy and resources ought to be trained in all the various aspects, because they are a kind of mini council. So what I would say is the amendment is quite right. It should go back to somewhere, it should be referred, and it should be referred to policy and resources. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bryce, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't agree with this going to policy and resources, because I think it underrepresents some parties actually at policy and resources. I disagree that training is going to be onerous. We are the local planning authority, and actually maybe members should have more planning training, because as the local planning authority, I don't see how that can do anything but educate us all, and that's a primary function for this council. And I think many councillors sit on committees, and actually the planning referrals process is there to have a backstop when we may be liable for to incur a lot of financial penalty or make financial investment. And therefore, I think most councillors who sit on many different committees therefore have an interest in weighing up that decision. And I think the training could be simply organised to take place before a council meeting, a full council meeting. We have many calls on our time. We attend many different training sessions and hearings. So I don't think it's too onerous, and I think it's the least that we could do to fulfil our duty.
Thank you, Councillor. Marion Ring.
Ring. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Whichever way you want it, Marion. Councillor Ring.
Thank you. I can understand why this all brings passion up in people. Well, passion, Clive, is one of the reasons why we stand here. The second thing is, this is a big responsibility. I actually went along to the planning referral meeting, and I will say here tonight what I said at our meeting the other night. How I see the officers and councillors treated was beyond anything that I'd ever seen before. Never. In 15 years, I just thought, I'll tell you what I thought when I have private time. We cannot go along treating people like it. And what we've got to do is we've got to be responsible when it comes to big money, what we're doing to the public. Because I'll say this until I'm blue in the face. The genuine public don't realise that all this money that we could lose is actually their money. I speak to people, they think that's all they do is pay their council tax to have the roads swept and the bins emptied. If they could see what goes on sometimes, I think they'd go ballistic at all of us, in a very different way than what we get here now. So somewhere along the line, someone has got to take responsibility for an end product, whether we like it or not. The easiest thing was to be full council. I'm a great believer that 55 councillors should take responsibility for why they're here. So I don't know how it can be done perfectly. The training is being used as just an excuse. Half of us don't do enough training that we should. And putting it under P&R, I'm sorry, is going back to the cabinet system. And I'm seeing that a lot in lots of committees. Okay? We have our committees because we want to do something. And if we can't take responsibility when we sit at a committee to take something on and try and find an answer, and we get to this stage what we're in tonight, then it does need looking at. So someone's got to take responsibility. I'll put my hand up, I'll take mine for my responsibility as Councillor Mary Ring, Shetway North. Every one of us should be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reimold.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, here we go. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just got to start off by disagreeing with my good friend Clive and Matt over there, because they both said at the start of their little speech that they've done a full review. Now, when we do full reviews, like when we review our Chief Executive, we interview the Chief Exec. Where was my invite as Chairman of the Planning Referrals to come along and speak to you? It wasn't there. So I can't say you've done a full review, which gives me a little bit of doubt. Chris, you're going to buy me a drink afterwards, because unfortunately I do agree with you for once. I think the system we have at this moment, even though I'm not going to make any amendments, has worked certainly when I chaired the meeting, and it worked when Janetta chaired the meeting. On the training side, we don't need full training. It's not like being a full planning committee. What happens is the planning officers will come up with a reason why we should not take something forward on expenses, on the cost of expense of losing an appeal. And it would be probably one subject. The one I did was highways. Now, unfortunately, I only had two councillors come, Tony and Ian Chittenden, who was here. I didn't agree with them on that night, but we was trained about a week before just on that one policy. You don't need to know everything, because you're not going to look at the whole scenario. As it's worked, certainly when I was chairing it, I felt it worked fine. Yes, we could have more people, and I don't mind. I've got big enough shoulders if somebody wants to lobby me, rightly or wrongfully, and say you're right or wrong. But we need a system in place, and without making the amendment that Chris would like to do, I'm going to support it going to P&R. You don't need 55 members in this council chambers all of a sudden, I'm sorry, talk amongst yourselves beforehand. It becomes political. Planning is not political, it's policy. So I think people just need to remind themselves of that. And the smaller it is, the better it is. And if the policy research, it goes to them, they need to be trained on the one item that the officers reckon that we could lose money on. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. David Burton. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be really brief. I cannot support the amendment as is being proposed. My reasoning is very simple. The planning referrals process is and should be reserved for only the most significant and most major of decisions. I would humbly suggest that invariably they will be ones which, in the first instance, have been taken contrary to our own local plan policy. Therefore, if this is the correct body to actually adopt a local plan and to set those policies, major deviation from them should also refer to the same authority. This is not something that we're talking about using twice a week on a whim. In my experience, I think it's twice ever. It's only the most major occasions. It's probably only when we deviate from our own policy that we as 55 agree, and therefore I think it's sound reasoning that it should be the 55 at full council review adverse decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Interesting to hear Councillor Daly, what he was saying, he's saved his sanity by not sitting on the planning committee. Well, I'm one of those that's lost my sanity through sitting on it. Was it 5 hours last week? It probably won't be quite so long this week. But I've listened to lots of the different arguments tonight, and there were some excellent arguments that were put across on all sides. One of the immediate things that concerned me is how 13, and when I call it trained people on the planning committee, it's not just trained, it's people that do the job, it's people that go out on sites, it's people that speak to residents, It's not just a case of doing an hour here and an hour there, and then we're all qualified to make these big decisions. I don't agree with that at all. But what we're almost looking at doing is asking those 13 qualified people, plus the substitute members, and we do get quite a few substitute members come to that committee, to be replaced by a completely different committee if something gets overturned against the officers. Now, I'm not saying that that is necessarily wrong, but you're going to get an inadequate committee. I'm not saying the P&R is inadequate, but in terms of actual kind of training and experience, to try and overturn that decision beforehand. At the same time, I really felt sorry for that referrals committee last time. There were 3 people that sat there, and it was almost like dagger eyes for all of them. In fact, I think they actually composed themselves extremely well. You know, from the chair and the 2 other people that sat on that committee, every single one of them really gave it their all. And, you know, I congratulate them all those months afterwards for actually just sitting there and taking the wrath and the evil eye from everybody. I'll be totally honest, and this is something that hasn't been said, I would quite like to see the planning committee actually make the decision. If that decision needed to be overturned, then that could be overturned by the people that want it overturned in the first place. But I believe that the planning committee on this council are the best people to make that decision rather than another committee further down the line. And let's all remind ourselves, this committee's only sat, or referral was twice in 10 years. So that's just my point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fran Wilson.
Sorry? Well, I will do when it comes up. Oh.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak to this tonight, but I've heard some things. I think there are a few corrections that need to be made, and I'd like to talk about analysis and how you look at an issue, because Councillor Borton has actually said something that would actually put paid to the committee system altogether. The Constitution clearly says that at full council we can move an amendment to a recommendation that is made by another committee. If you say that's wrong, by definition you're also saying that you shouldn't be able to refer a decision that's made by any other committee. So the service committees, there is the ability to refer it if you think it's wrong, and it goes elsewhere, in some cases to P&R, in one case it goes to full council. So let's be very clear about this. It is perfectly acceptable to actually challenge and move an amendment across the board. That is what democracy is all about. I also don't quite follow the issue that P&R is turning into a quasi-cabinet system, because it's got 19 members, heaven help us, and they're politically... 15, sorry. Where did I get the extra ones from? Let me put it this way, when I'm chairing it, it feels like 100 sometimes. So the fact is that it's politically balanced, and it just cannot turn into a cabinet system. The thing I wasn't going to say anything about, but I've heard so many people referring to this, is that when committee make a decision and it's referred to the referral committee can overturn it. I'm sorry, but that is technically not correct. What can happen is that if, in the opinion of the officer at planning committee, it is heading down a dreadful path that would cost a lot of money, with the chairman, obviously, because the chairman's got to move it, he can ask for it to go to the referral committee before the decision is made. So that's what you've got to understand. Once a decision is made by the planning committee, yes, we've had 2 that have been referred to the referral committee, but what they're then actually deciding isn't to overturn the decision, it's whether the council should or should not be fighting it if it is challenged. So be very, very clear about that And I checked that out today because I was so concerned about hearing people saying that this referral committee
Councillor,
overturned.
your time is up.
Sorry. So, just very quickly, I am going to vote for the amendment. I think it's daft going to full council.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Oh boy, well, we seem to have got into a rather good debate, as Councillor Daly quite rightly said. Two things, or a few things. It's only been used twice in the last 10 years, so it's hardly a frequent occurrence. Many councils do not seem to feel the need for it at all. I mean, Sevenoaks, doesn't you have one? I think it's quite a few in Kent do not have them. So you have to ask yourself, why is it so important for us to have one? And now the other thing I would say is, I know there are different views on this subject, but I think one of the things I would not want to subject members to the sort of pressures they experienced this last time. The 3 people who attended that committee, that was pretty awful, I have to admit, and I would never want to see that again, and I certainly don't support going back to that type of referral situation. Now, the Democracy Committee did arrive at a democratic decision, and I was there as a visiting member, and I witnessed it. And they went into it in a lot of detail. To say somehow they should rubber stamp what went on in the working group prior to that, I think is completely wrong, and is very misleading, because this committee did have a very, very, very serious debate, and it came up with a view that the best way forward was for it to go to full council. And I actually think this process should not be a standard process. It should be a difficult process, because it is a very serious and very difficult issue. I also think there's been a huge exaggeration over the training issue, and I agree totally with Councillor Bryce and other councillors who have mentioned this. It can be done, and to use that as an excuse, I think, is completely wrong and very misleading. I also am very anti this going to the P&R committee. I do not think a service committee has a role to overturn, or whatever you might call it, a statutory committee, which is what the planning committee is. I would personally be perfectly happy not to have any backstop at all. I think if other councils get away with that, I don't see why we need it. But if it is the general view that we need a backstop, then I think the only sensible answer is to go to the full council. If there's a conflict of interest with planning committee members, they can be excluded from it. It is extremely easy, and they can be trained relatively straightforwardly. So I would strongly support the recommendation of the Democracy Committee. I think it was the right decision, and I would also add one more point. We need to trust the full council. There seems to be an implication that we're just here to have some sort of punch-up every month. Well, that's not the case. This is a serious place, and it's a place of serious debate, and I would recommend that we support the Democracy Committee's recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garton. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members, we've got 2 different positions here, which is one, the committee, which takes the planning committee, which takes a quasi-judicial legal task. If we are taking a financial risk on this quasi-judicial committee, then it is only right and proper to have a backstop, some sort of like a second chamber approach to this. And that's where I think it becomes a political decision. And a political decision should be taken in this chamber. Because the political decision is, are all the elected members willing to support a perceived financial risk? And the financial risk is a political decision on behalf of the taxpayer, and the taxpayer is our voter. And therefore, I support the recommendation by the Democracy Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Matt Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Much of what I was going to say the second time round had. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you've already spoken. Thank you. Councillor Gooch. Thank you.
Am I on the go? Yippee. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quite simply, the responsibility for financial risk lies clearly with the Policy and Resources Committee, Therefore, it is entirely appropriate that Policy and Resources are the committee to which the referral should be made. Policy and Resources is also entirely cross-party. It is cross-party. So, therefore, I will be voting for Clive English's amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bryce, thank you.
I'd like to request a name vote on the motion and the main vote as well.
Need to be 5. Need to be 5.
Yeah, come on.
Have we got 5?
Have they got all their names?
Thank you, councillors. Thank you. The Councillor, Chief Executive is going to mention this. Thank you.
No, it's an amendment.
You're on Twitch.
Sorry, could we just have a little bit of quiet, perhaps? Councillor Harper reserved his right, and therefore he can speak before we move to the vote.
I think it's really all been said. Whatever way you go, the whole Labour group, as it stands at the moment, will be trained 100%. So we will be fully trained. And at that point, I will let us proceed to the vote.
So, members, if I may have your attention, please. The vote is on the amendment moved by Councillor English and seconded by Councillor Harper. For clarity, that is set out on pages 189 and 190 of your papers. So if I may start. Councillor Atkinson. Councillor Barnard.
Against.
Councillor Blackmore.
Against.
Councillor Borton.
Against.
Councillor Bryce.
Against.
Councillor David Burton.
Against.
Councillor Matt Burton.
Against.
Councillor Butler.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Cumming.
Against.
And Councillor Daly.
For.
Councillor Ells.
Against.
Councillor English.
For.
Councillor Firmer.
For.
Councillor Field.
For.
Councillor Fissenden.
For.
Councillor Fort.
Against.
Councillor Garland.
For.
Councillor Garton.
Against.
Councillor Gooch.
For.
Councillor Greer.
For.
Councillor Grigg.
For.
Councillor Harper.
For.
Councillor Harvey. Now your turn. Councillor Harwood. And Councillor Hasty. Councillor Joy. Councillor Lewins. Councillor Brian Mortimer.
For.
Councillor Derek Mortimer.
For.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Nagy.
For.
Councillor Perry.
Against.
Councillor Pickett. Councillor Powell. Councillor Prendergast. Councillor Ring. Councillor Robertson. Councillor Round. Councillor J. Sams. Councillor T. Sams. Councillor Spooner. Councillor Springett. Councillor Stockel. Councillor Vizard. Councillor Willis. And Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Can you run the numbers together just to make sure we've got the right number in the chamber? Yeah, 29 for 19 again. 29 for 19 again. Okay. So, members, I'm sure you were keeping the tally as we went along. The votes for 29, the votes against 19, and so the amendment is carried.
Members, thank you. The amendment now becomes the substantive motion, so we'll vote on that.
So we're asking for who's voting for? Who's voting for?
Those that are voting for?
We don't know what to vote for.
And against?
And those against, thank you. Abstentions?
Should have 3. Did you vote?
Yes.
But it's carried. It's carried.
Motion's carried, thank you. Councillors, agenda item 14, Democracy Committee, 15th of November 2017, as on page 204.
Councillor Bissenden.
Councillor Bissenden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation as set out on page 204 to 212.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor English. Thank you. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you.
Paul put his hand up.
We would urge the Council to reject the proposals. We feel that in terms of the budget meeting, that the requiring written motions this far in advance removes the element of I don't know what you might want to call it, spontaneity, which might come up through discussions on the budget, which ultimately could result in improved decisions being made, and therefore we will be voting against.
Thank you, Councillor. Agenda item 15, joint report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance and the Head of Legal Partnerships, page 213. I call upon the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance to introduce this report, commencing on page 213.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I submit the report to Council as set out on the agenda.
Thank you. Leader.
Thank you, members. The Local Government Ombudsman makes a number of recommendations in relation to this particular case and how we discharge our duties. Some of the recommendations made by the Ombudsman are asking us to act over and above legal requirements. We do not, for example, pay food costs for those in temporary accommodation, and there is no duty to do so. We accept the recommendation to pay for the cost of bed and breakfast and have previously offered this to Mr and Mrs A and apologised. We also accept that we should pay the removal and storage costs. The criticism around the eviction failed to take account of the contractual relationship between the proprietor and the council in the provision of emergency accommodation. This misdirection is unhelpful and creates a precedent for all local housing authorities that is not enshrined in law. On this basis, I move recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 4C and D only for approval.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gooch. Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 16. Oral report of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, 28th of November 17. There is no report. Agenda item 17. Oral report of the Licensing Committee, 4th of December 2017. There's no report. Agenda item 18. Oral report of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability, Transportation Committee, 5th of December 2017. There is no report on this occasion. Agenda item 25. I called upon Councillor Harper to move his motion relating to the bridge gyratory system.
There we go. I think the motion is reasonably clear. It's going to be seconded by my colleague. We feel that the gyratory system, whilst the authorities might consider it finished, has really left a divisive influence within our community, that people living on the west bank of Maidstone have really suffered as a result of this. It's the traffic getting through to the town centre is worse from our side of town now. There's longer traffic delays than there used to be. Plus, it's immeasurably worse for pedestrians and cyclists. The closure of the subway has meant that pedestrians are left having to effectively queue to get across the road, swallowing all the traffic fumes and pollution while they're waiting to cross the road. The phasing allows them to get halfway into that small road island where they're corralled, and then later you can get across the other side of the road. That's it's just not really an acceptable solution in the 21st century. The road system, the gyratory was just done to speed up cars for, 30 seconds or something. And the expense of 30 seconds improvement for cars heading north-south. People coming in from West Maidstone have really been disadvantaged as a result of this. And what we would like to see is this council looking into how, given where we are now, that remedial measures might be done to improve it, both, as I say, for pedestrians and for cyclists. But speaking to a lot of residents over on the West Bank, there's a big feeling that, people are really annoyed over this. They feel we've wasted a lot of public expenditure to actually reduce their quality of life. And also, quite a few people now won't come into Maidstone Town Centre on foot because they don't, find it really an unattractive environment. And I've heard people would rather go in a shop elsewhere than in our own town centre. So this system is, because it was looked at just really from vehicles' point of view, has totally disadvantaged cyclists and pedestrians. And when only, we talk about modal shift, or whatever phrase you want to talk about, getting people out of cars, this will result effectively in the opposite. It makes it much less a pleasant experience coming into the town centre if you're on foot, let alone if you're a cyclist. When I obviously could talk for a long time on that, which I won't, but I think I made the point clear that we need to look at this again to see how we can make it benefit people living on the western side of our town.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Yep, okay. In accordance with the Council's procedure, Rule 17.4, the motion having been formally moved and seconded will be referred to the Maidstone Joint Transportation Board, which will be reviewing the bridge gyratory system in the spring. However, the Council may debate the motion, and factually briefing notes have been circulated. I've got note that Councillor Brian Clark wants to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I do agree that some of the points in this motion would not necessarily be within the gift of the Council to determine. But I did want to make a point also. I do agree with the spirit of this motion. I did actually put forward an item which has been on the work programme for some time now at the JTB to review the before and after performance of the bridge gyratory. I was told at a previous JTB meeting that they were waiting for the finalisation of the signage and the road markings, and that would come after Easter this year. And it's actually quite disappointing for me to find that it's going to be the spring of next year, because I think we're all suffering with some of the consequences or some of the knock-on effects of the gyratory. At the previous JTB meeting, even the local head of Arriva buses agreed that there have been major impacts to bus services in Maidstone, and in some ways we're pushing for increased bus services, and we're struggling with what we have and the changes that we've made and impacts that we've made to Arriva. I do also want to mention one other point which I think was missed in the motion, but I do want to bring it to the attention of this chamber, and that is, if you're on the St Peter Street Bridge and you're heading towards Hastings, towards the south, I feel that there is a real gap in the safety of what we would expect when you're making a turn there and what's actually been implemented. Time after time, as I've headed from the A229 towards Chatham, I've seen people exiting the St Peter's Bridge heading towards me where they haven't managed to turn correctly towards Hastings. The last time this happened was last week, and the person came so far towards me, it actually caused a major hazard for them to reverse back and undo what they've just done. And I really will be recommending, when this comes to JTB, that we change the road markings from the St Peter's Bridge to actually guide traffic across to where they should be. I really feel this is a major safety hazard at that junction. I also feel that if you look at the roadway where cars are trying to get into from their perspective, the no entry signs on the two traffic signals are around about this size and they're unlit. And I really do feel that we've done a very poor job of guiding traffic through that junction, and I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. The feedback I've had from KCC is that there will be an audit of the way the gyratory is performing in spring, but they're also, at the moment, they're looking at a safety audit for the junction, and I certainly will be giving my feedback, and I think that members probably agree with all of those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor David Burton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Very simply, members will be aware that I do actually chair the Joint Transportation Board in the current year. I can assure you that this is on the work programme. I have spoken directly with KCC Highways officers. It is their remit and not ours. They are aware of all of the issues raised. There is ongoing work reviewing signage, light timings and safety, but the big piece of work, which is to look at the statistics of whether things have improved, not improved or become worse, relies upon a whole one-year cycle of data collection which takes us till February, and after that point the matter will substantively come to the Joint Transportation Board for all of these points to be considered.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clive English.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I would simply recommend that we do not discuss this further tonight, because we will simply be having this discussion several times over, so I would move next business.
Thank you. Councillor Den Daly. Okay. Thank you. I didn't quite get that. The motion now stands referred to the Maidstone Joint Transportation Board. Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 19, report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, page 254. I call upon the Head of Policy, Communication and Governance to submit her report relating to the review which has been undertaken of the allocation of seats on committees.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I submit my report to Council following the recent by-election and the abolition of the Planning Referral Committee, and draw Council's attention to Appendix 1, which has been circulated.
Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the allocation of seats on committees be as set out in Appendix 1, circulated separately at the meeting.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Appointment of committees.
No, you have to ask is the motion agreed?
Oh, sorry. Is the motion agreed? Thank you very much. Jumping ahead of myself. Appointment of committees. Leader.
I move that the Council accepts the wishes of the group leaders with regard to the appointment of committees and substitutes as set out in the schedule circulated separately at the meeting.
Mr Perry. Is the motion agreed? Agenda item 21, report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, review of allocation of seats on the COBTREE MANOR Estate Charity Committee. Leader.
I move that the allocation of seats on the COBTREE MANOR Estate Charity Committee be as follows: Conservative 2, Liberal Democrats 2, Independent 1.
Thank you, Leader. Can it be noted that the Council is now acting as corporate trustees of the charity known as the COBTREE MANOR Committee. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Perry. Is the motion agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 22, appointment of the COBTREE MANOR Estate Charity Committee.
I move that the Council accepts the wishes of the group leaders with regard to the appointment of members and substitutes to serve on the COBTREE MANOR Estate Charity Committee as set out in the schedule circulated separately at the meeting.
Is the motion seconded? Councillor Perry. Is the motion agreed? Thank you. Item 23, agenda item 23, report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, review of allocation of seats on the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Museum Trust. Leader.
I move that the allocation of seats on the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Museum Trust Committee be as follows: Conservative 2, Liberal Democrats 2, UKIP 1.
Thank you, Leader. Can members please note that the Council now acting as corporate trustees of the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Museum Trust. Thank you. Right. Sorry?
Could you ask if it's seconded?
Oh, yes. Is that seconded? Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Right. We will get there. It's been a long day, you know. Appointment of the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Trust Museum Trust Committee. Look to lead it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Last one coming up. I move that the Council accepts the wishes of the group leaders with regard to the appointment of members and substitutes to serve on the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment Museum Trust Committee as set out in the schedule circulated separately at the meeting.
Thank you, Leader. Is the motion seconded? Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Agreed. Right, well, we haven't quite finished. You might think we have. One, I'd like to wish you all happy Christmas, prosperous New Year, and everything you hope yourself. Also, I'd like to thank all those that contributed to a little box which is sitting on the top of the desk here. I'll wait until I get home to open it, just in case it explodes. I referred to in my comments of the auction we had at the Mercure Hotel a couple of weeks ago. I bid for... Now, everybody wants one of these, don't they? It's the Middlesbrough Football Club pennant. And I've been bet by Councillor Round that I won't wear it. Now, he's bet me £100. Now, if there's anybody here or any group of people that can put together more than £100, I'm quite happy to wear this as a bib. But other than that, it's over to your corner, Councillor Round. No takers?
Are you going to put it on? Are you going to put it on?
No. I'd only put it on if I get money over £110. So I'm not going to put it on. Please come forward and pay your money. And it's all going to go into my charity account.
Yes.
Where's your money?
It's in the mayor's office.
Well, he tells me it's in the mayor's office, so thank you very much. That's another £10. That's another £100 we got into the account, and that undoubtedly takes us over £3,000 to that event. I don't think I've got anything else to say, have I? No. Anyway, there's some wine in there, some meats, some cheese, etc. Go and enjoy yourself. Thank you very much. And drive carefully on your way home. Close the meeting. Thank you.